Hey, Shay.
Hello, Anna. Anna, today's an exciting day.
Yes, this is our 10th episode. Can you believe it?
Our little brainchild is nearly 6 months old already.
Little baby.
It's pretty hard to wrap my head around that for sure.
So, in celebration of our 10th episode, we have a few fun additions to our platform.
Woohoo! So, first up, each of our episodes are now available on YouTube. So, if you or your friends don't use podcasting apps, you can always join in there.
Yes, and the YouTube uploads feature subtitles for those of you who would like to read along.
So cool. And also, you can now buy Teacher Think-Aloud podcast swag. If you appreciate what we're doing here and want to support the maintenance of this podcast, buy a Teacher Think-Aloud tee or a sticker or a mug or a pencil case.
So many things. And we had so much fun designing these items, and we hope you'll love them as much as we do. You can find a link on our website at teacherthinkaloud.com. Just click on support us in the main menu.
So, Anna, back to business. What are we talking about today again?
We're so excited. We almost just didn't have the episode. Today, we're looking to simplify the lives of our listeners with tried and true classroom routines.
Right. Frequently used routines and activities, those patterns and procedures that keep our classroom going.
Here we go. Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think Aloud podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Anna.
And I'm Shay. So, about those classroom habits and routines, I want to preface this by saying that having a routine doesn't mean doing the same thing in the same order every class, right?
Right.
I tend to panic a bit when I hear that word thrown about, routine. Ugh.
Yeah, right. I get that. The word routine may feel like it quashes your creativity a little. So maybe instead of routine, we use the word ritual. Does that land any differently?
It does. So regardless of whether you're calling it a routine or a ritual or something else, we are honing in on those habitual activities that you rely on in your teaching.
Right. So these rituals are important. They add structure to our class, increase efficacy and efficiency.
Not to mention, they maintain our sanity.
Yes. Having a gamut of rituals or routine activities to pull from really helps teachers orient themselves. There's no reinventing the wheel each time you go to teach a class. And implementing routines from the very beginning of the class gives students structure, something to hold on to. So let's start with the overall structure of a class. Shay, do you have any activities that you incorporate that you think create structure in your sessions?
Absolutely. My routines occur most commonly at the very beginning and end of my classes. We've talked about non-negotiables for planning in previous episodes, and having a warm-up and a cool down or a moment for reflection, those are non-negotiable routines for me.
I feel the same. Having an effective opener and closing activity helps to shape a learner's overall takeaways from a lesson. I think starting off with an activity that students are familiar with, perhaps even expecting, can help pave the way for success in subsequent activities.
Yes. So what is your go-to way to begin a session then?
Well, I like to start class with a conversation starter, an icebreaker of sorts, right? I've mentioned this before. And I give them a prompt to think about or write on for a few minutes. It's a really simple and effective way to have students tap into their English, get the creativity flowing, and generate some personalized content for discussion.
Nice. Not to mention that the prompt gives you a chance to guide their thinking towards the themes that you'll be exploring during class. Get them in the zone a bit before diving in headfirst.
Right.
I have a tendency to start with some form of writing. Sometimes it's a free write, sometimes it's a quick write. The quick write requires that the students write in a timed environment with clear parameters, and usually they'll submit their writing to me. The free write instead lets students delve into their own thoughts, explore ideas more freely. It can feel kind of awkward to just write freely in that way, though.
Yeah, well, but that's the beauty of routines, though. It may be uncomfortable at first, but by doing it every day, they slowly become more comfortable with the practice. Over time, they might learn to relish it, actually enjoy that routine. So In a sense, routines serve as a fluffy blanket, a piece of chocolate, something comforting, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah, that's exactly it. When students know what they're expected to do, they tend to lean into it a bit. So, while I think it might be natural to associate routine with rigidity and discipline, which in part it very much is, establishing routines also caters to the effective filters of the learners. And this routine, I might add, writing at the beginning of class, it really serves as a temperature check. Where are my students that day, intellectually, emotionally, physically?
Yeah, we have to read the room, right? The success of our activities relies on how the students are feeling in that moment. So it's great to check in with students. Maybe weave that into one of your rituals.
Yes. You know, I'm a huge advocate of mental health checks. Just the other day, I asked them to jot down a few bullet points to share how they were feeling. How is their current course load in general? Are they feeling overwhelmed, capable, ready? How are they addressing their personal needs and taking time for self care?
This actually reminds me of something one of my choreography professors way back in college used to do. Shout out to Paula Ahrens for this one. At the start of each Friday class, so this is an example of a weekly ritual, not daily, the professor would facilitate what she called wine and cheese. Only wine was spelt with an H. So it's not like we actually drank wine and ate cheese.
Well, that's too bad. Should add that to the ritual.
Right. Yeah. But so for the wine part, we had to say one thing that hadn't gone well that week. And the cheese was something we're smiling about. So we had to go around in a circle and say one thing that we wanted to whine about, one thing that hadn't gone well for us that week. And then one thing that we were happy about or grateful for. It was a nice once a week ritual that I think got us into the headspace of the class. I mean, the objective of the class was to stimulate creativity and talk about different approaches to choreographing a dance. So within that space, that was really helpful.
And I could see that being helpful in any collaborative space. We need to vent sometimes, clear the air to make space for learning something new. I also like that there was a moment to highlight gratitude. That's something that educators are incorporating more and more nowadays, this aspect of mindfulness in the classroom.
Yeah, it was cool.
I could also see that being used as an exit slip of sorts. I tend to vacillate between doing these mental health check ins at the start and at the end of class, depending on how I think my students might be feeling.
Nice. That's a great twist on what's a pretty straightforward routine. I think most of us are familiar with exit slips or exit tickets, whatever you call them. But basically, at the end of class, you give students a piece of paper, or maybe it's online in virtual form, and ask them to write down one thing they learned, any questions they have. So usually exit tickets are used to gauge comprehension, assess content. But I like your idea, Shay, of using the exit slip as a side conversation with individuals in your class, touching upon their well-being instead.
Thanks.
My exit slips are a little more about students reflecting on what they learned in class. I'll usually pose the same set of questions each day to tap into their metacognition, get them to really think about their own learning, to redirect their thoughts towards the next class or what they need to do at home.
Awesome. I love metacognitive tasks, those layers of learning.
Yeah, I try to create opportunities for self-reflection in my routines. Another thing that routines are great for is maintaining order and creating accountability among students, making the students responsible for the flow of the class.
Oh, yeah. Put the onus on them. Most naturally, I think this appears when students work in groups. I try to assign roles in any sort of group work to remind students of the balance they need to strike between individual and group accountability. Like perhaps one person would be responsible for being the scribe, another would be the reporter, a timekeeper, a summarizer, a vocabulary detective. I don't know. The roles depend on what kind of task they're doing, of course. But what I've found is that establishing protocol around group assignments makes them easier to grasp.
Protocol. Yes, that's one of the beautiful upsides of creating routines in the classroom. Activities are met with automaticity once the routine has been established. Maybe you spend a bit more time parsing out the instructions and making sure students know what the standards are for this kind of group work at the beginning of the course. But when they find themselves in this scenario again in the future, there's less resistance and confusion, more ease.
Yes. And we're not just doing it for them, right? Fostering accountability requires a gradual shift of responsibility. Another routine that I rely pretty heavily on is the good old Jigsaw.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with Jigsaw, where you have students become experts on material and come together and teach each other about what they've learned. It's like they're putting together a jigsaw puzzle of ideas or concepts that they've learned.
Right. So there are a few variations of Jigsaw. I think
Mhm.
traditionally you would start with basic groups, and each student in the group needs to learn about a different topic or subtopic. They then go work with a group of experts, so to speak, other students who learned about the same subtopic before then coming back to their original group to explain what they learned. That way, with their original group, they construct a fuller understanding of the overarching topic, and each person is responsible for a chunk of the learning.
Mhm.
This is such a great way to get students to depend on each other rather than on the teacher for learning new content. I'll admit, though, that can be a bit of a logistical nightmare.
Nightmare is right.
Mhm.
I guess that's why I tend to use a slightly simpler jigsaw method. Just have them work in a group or individually to learn about something and then present what they learned to the whole class.
That works too. And honestly, I do the same. Like I often use this simplified jigsaw for review. I do a lot of putting students in groups to look at a specific thing that we had talked about in class, whether it's a grammar point or something more content focused. And then they come back and summarize the main points to remember about that thing that they reviewed to the rest of the class. And then they kind of are the experts for that topic.
Yeah, this kind of routine group work, like assigning roles in group discussions or jigsaw variations, this is just one way to take the teacher out of the equation a bit. Not only are students responsible for the structure of their group or the content they're learning, but repeating this kind of activity, whether every day or periodically in class, after teaching it to them and reinforcing how the activity works a few times, the teacher doesn't really have to do much to get it off the ground. The
Right.
students know what they're doing.
Exactly. That's the whole point of these routines.
Another ritual that springs to mind, and it may seem a little trivial, but using a ball to determine who speaks next.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
So often, students rely on me inserting myself into the conversation to move it along. And it always results in this unnatural, sort of
Mm.
choppy dialogue. So I'll use this inflatable globe that students toss to one another in order to choose who speaks next.
Oh, I love that you're using a globe. That's
It's
perfect.
pretty perfect.
And nice use of TPR, total physical response.
Hmm.
In the virtual classroom, you don't really have this physical space to operate in, right? So instead, I like to use a sort of popcorn conversation style. I actually call it chain of answers. And I have the students simply call the next person's name, nominate the next person to speak. Students can use the raise hand functionality on Zoom too to let whoever is speaking know that they have something to share. And then the speaker will choose the next participant. This totally extracts me from the selection process, and students know what to expect. They get used to calling on each other, and that way they also don't feel targeted by the teacher.
Mean teacher always calling on me.
Hmm.
That's a great turn taking technique. What I find is that students are actually quite good at making sure everyone has a chance to speak.
They can be really supportive of one another.
Yeah, that reminds me of an activity that I use maybe too much.
Hmm.
Think, pair, share.
Wait, too much think, pair, share? No way.
Is it
Remember, we
possible?
we almost named this podcast Think, Pair, Share, but I think the title was taken.
Yeah, it was. I like our title now, but we actually use Think, Pair, Share as a technique to create every episode. We brainstorm individually, then we come together to have a sort of preliminary conversation, and then we share the results with our listeners.
Nice little behind the scenes look.
Now you know.
Yeah. But I think it's just the simplest, purest, most beautiful routine. Think, pair, share. Let them think for a minute or two, then have them talk to a partner, and then share with the class without that threat of coming up with something on the spot.
I love it because it works with classes with multiple levels or different personalities, which is pretty much the norm, right?
Yeah.
You give the shy student or maybe the less advanced student a chance to formulate a response before having to share out, which I think can be a major source of anxiety for some students.
Simple, pure, elegant.
Classic. And like any classic, you can tweak it a little. Skip the pair part as needed, or maybe skip think, depending on what your class dynamic is.
Another routine that helps a lot with the flow of a class is establishing how you're going to bring back students' attention from group work or whenever the noise level has gotten too high in your class.
Yes. How do we rein them in when it's time to transition into another activity? Do you have any routines for transitions, Anna?
Actually, I have one that works pretty well in person. There's a lot of clapping for attention, right? Or hushing or repeat after me. But what I find works best is hum.
Are you meditating? You're going to have to explain that one a little.
Yeah. So, especially in a big class, before I started teaching online, I would have like 30 people running around doing stuff. And so, for the first day of class, I would teach them to do this. I would start humming, and the people who heard me would have to join into the hum. And then slowly everyone else would join in as they heard it, as it got louder and louder. In the end, we ended up with this kind of group chant. Hum.
Little harmony there. That's super calming. I can imagine that the reverberations must have created a really relaxing atmosphere.
Yeah, they kind of had fun with it because it was very musical. It was sort of like an exciting aspect of class. And I think they would talk about it outside of class. What about you, Shay? Do you have any transition routines?
Well, I don't think I have any that students talked about outside of class. That's quite the honor. Sometimes I would use music to signify the start of a transition, put on some lo-fi hip hop to let them know it's time to listen, or alternatively, pause music that I had on during group work. The silence would grow louder and students would recognize it was time to listen. I would also whisper to get students to start to pay attention, causing a fall of silence and a sort of domino effect.
Nice. You're making it a collective effort to bring the focus back, and you're making everyone giggle a little. What I like about these ideas is that they keep the atmosphere light and playful.
Right. I think if you start shouting like, hey, look at me, we start to move away from the learner-centered classroom that we talk about so much here. I think that when we start shouting and we get on our soapboxes, it's really kind of reminding students that like we are the focal points after all, even if we pretend we aren't.
Yeah, and we don't want that.
So all of this is dandy, but I feel the need to add that while routine is great, we have to be careful with just how much becomes routine in our classes. It's easy to go overboard when you start to reap the benefits of a sweet routine, right? In particular, I'm thinking about creating too many different things for students to remember. Like if you have an online component, try to make deadlines the same for all assignments.
Right.
Personally, I like 11:59 p.m.
Clean and clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So students don't have to juggle those minute submission details.
And if you're using online platforms for learning like Padlet or Nearpod or VoiceThread, limit yourself to a few that serve multiple purposes. Each of these new tools require a learning curve. So don't flood your students with, 7 new tools for 7 different course activities.
And don't assume that just because you might be working with digital natives, that they automatically know how to use the tech tool you're introducing. Odds are your students probably don't use Nearpod for fun.
That reminds me, I had a student who really struggled with anything digital over this past summer. And it took, I'd say, 5 out of the 8 weeks of class for her to fully understand how it worked. But then the last 3 weeks were great. And she was so proud of herself and was able to do everything.
And that, my friends, is why we have routine. Your student had a chance to really grasp these recurring course elements, which she wouldn't have had you said, forget it, and move to a new set of tricks. We live in a culture of instant gratification. We want answers now, results yesterday, and our patience dwindles more each day. So we have to be conscious of this when we're attempting to create routines in the classroom. Don't just throw it away because it didn't work overnight. Give students time to get used to it. Some will get it right away, and others might take a while to fully absorb the routine.
Exactly. The success of a routine has so much to do with its implementation. You can't expect to introduce something halfway through the semester and have it become natural for your learners. Make sure that you're leading with your routines in the first few weeks of class.
I think that serves as a nice takeaway from this conversation. I'd also like to call our attention to the title of this episode. Keep it simple, stupid. Sorry, I'm not being mean, listeners. I just want to remind us that routines are meant to simplify our lives, not add more stress.
And sometimes the simplest of routines can make your life a lot easier.
So, teachers, we want to hear from you. What routines or activities do you draw on frequently? How have routines made your life easier or improved the quality of your classes?
You can join the conversation on our various social media accounts. Email us via our contact form at teacherthinkaloud.com or comment via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube.
Oh, we get to say YouTube now.
Yeah, we welcome your reflections, questions, and ideas.
And for more resources related to today's topic, take a look at our website and our podcast anchor page, anchor.fm/teacherthinkaloud.
And if you have a chance, dear listeners, check out our Support Us page at teacherthinkaloud.com. We appreciate the love.
So much. Thank you for joining us on the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. And until next time, happy teaching
and happy reflecting.